It'll be fine, whatever it is.
Yeah,
It'll be fine.
We'll see.
Alright. Hi, I'm Nate House, and this is Craft House Media. Today I'm here with Dan Haybron. You're a professor, and I wanted to say thank you so much for having us, and you are also the author of a couple books that have come out in 2008 and 2013. And you've also been working on a fairly large grant with the Templeton Foundation and St. Louis University. Did I say those things right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm very happy that you've taken some time to spend with us and talk a little bit about your work with happiness.
Well, thank you, Nate. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Well, and thank you for
It's not going to be asked.
Yeah, and thanks for letting us come to your home as well. Tell me a little bit about what it is that you study.
So this is stuff I'd always thought about since I was probably at least 10. Something really I pretty early on figured out that our way of life is pretty out of whack. Grew up living between two different cultures, and in one environment we were happy and the other one not so much. But then graduate school kind of tried to drill that out of me, and then at some point I was working on a dissertation topic that didn't really suit me. I went to the beach, I went body surfing. That's a very immersive experience. There's something about being in the ocean, and suddenly I realized that I really hadn't been that happy. And I'd forgotten what it was like to be really happy. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And I know there are these psychologists and the economists doing really interesting work in this area. So let's figure out what they're doing. Like, there really hadn't been attention paid to, are they measuring the right things? Is this really what's important? Do they understand happiness right? That sort of thing.
Wow, so this experience at the beach made you remember that you could be happier.
Yeah, and it's one of the themes of my research is that we're not very good at judging how happy we are, and I hadn't been. And it was really just that stark contrast where you get a very quick change and you realize, oh yeah, I thought I'd been happy, but no, I just gotten used to. You sort of deal with low-level stress and whatnot, and grumpiness or whatever, and you just get used to it, and that becomes your normal, and so it's. I think a lot of people don't realize kind of where they are, how much happier they could be.
So you said that there's a lack of balance, right? Is this a lack of balance in our society, a lack of balance in people's lives, balance everywhere?
Yeah, it's a good question. Exactly what that means. I guess ultimately it just means our values are out of whack, out of place, out of order. We value the wrong things. It's both very destructive for other people in terms of poverty, in terms of the environment especially, but also we pay a really high price ourselves. I don't think it's the kind of pursuit of endless material gains. I mean, it sounds trite to say that, but we're still figuring this out. We're still not quite believing that more and more money isn't what is going to really make us happier. And often what it does, beyond a certain point, is push people away from each other and create all sorts of new stresses and anxieties that it's not great to be poor, but it's also what we're doing can be counterproductive.
So do we see that a lot in people, that we have an entire society focused on how to become financially successful, and they leave behind success in other parts of their lives? Is that fair to say? Or
yeah, and I think a lot of what happens in our society is people ultimately have sensible values. Like if you really get people talking, if they're thoughtful, or at the end of life, kind of everybody figures out that their relationships, their family, their friends, that's the most important thing to them.
right.
And things like doing something meaningful and worthwhile, doing something you're good at, the stuff that actually makes people happy, people kind of realize those things are important, but our culture encourages us to devalue those things and put the emphasis on. My father once was a professor, and he once had a student who he asked him, what are your goals? He said, well, I want to make a lot of money. My father said, well, is that really what you want? He said, no, it's just everybody thinks you're a flake if you say something like, I want to be happy, or I want to do something meaningful. So like that's the culture that doesn't really equip us to really think in a very deep or substantive way about what's important in life.
helping people to understand what's really important to them is a big step in them becoming happier.
That's a good way of putting it. Yes, I think that, and also I'm especially interested in the social, the cultural, and the policy side of it, so that we put ourselves in an environment where the things that we value tend to come naturally. So living in the suburbs of St. Louis, it can be hard to get together with friends, and people like me, we're all so busy and we have to make appointments to see our friends, and our kids need appointments to have. We have the concept of a play date, which is kind of strange when you think about it. I just came back from Colombia, and Colombia, obviously, the country has some difficulties, but they also have, there's a lot of good things going on there too. It's just a matter of course that my friends there tell me each evening, it's like, oh, so what are we doing tonight? And it's a matter of course that you see each other, and the idea of a play date, I think, would probably seem utterly bizarre.
So, are there some cultures that are happier than other cultures?
Absolutely. I think culture is a really big part of it, and that's one of the things that's the hardest thing to figure out how to change, aside from doing things like writing books about happiness or doing videos like this. Available at a fine bookstore here. So there are really interesting cultural differences just in. It's very easy to criticize the United States, but and a lot of people make fun of how we're always cheerful and hey, how you doing, and everything's great, and people get kind of worried if you say anything other than fine or like, yeah, I'm not too good. Right, you're not supposed to say that. But there's something very positive and that actually you do, I think, get a happiness boost from just being in a very positive thinking, optimistic culture. We can be a little too optimistic, but I think it can be refreshing when you come from abroad and you see how friendly and open people here are, and I think that really helps us. On the other hand, we have elements in the culture that this Protestant work ethic or whatever it is, where we obsess over working too much, and then and in some circles, I lived in New York, be cocktail parties and people would brag about how little they sleep. We do that here too. And, it's not really something to brag about. You have a poor quality of life. But there's different kinds of happiness also that different cultures can promote. So some cultures have, and I admit I'm partial to what I like to call an enjoyer culture, where people tend to focus more on kind of relaxing and enjoying life. And that's not necessarily the same as just being hedonistic. It could be you take food and music seriously and you spend time with friends. So New Orleans in the United States or Latin American countries very much, I think, have that kind of tendency. And it's very healthy. And it's, I think, a major reason you see such high levels of happiness in Latin American countries. On the other hand, I think there are other cultures, like France is not a very cheerful culture for sure. And I don't really have a great beat on how happy they are. They'll certainly won't tell you they're happy because people might judge you harshly if you say, "Oh, I'm really happy."
What are you so happy about?
Okay, come see, come sa. But on the other hand, their culture helps in other ways, like not working long, crazy hours, taking long meals. So they spend, I think, about twice as much time as Americans do at mealtime, and it tends to be much more social. So they really they spend, even if they're less cheerful, they spend more time in things that are more gratifying. And whereas here we choose to spend more time commuting, which tends not to make people very happy.
I was trying to understand a little bit about the outcome. There was this large grant that you were overseeing. You were the project manager for.
Yeah, whatever you call it. Yeah, the
principal investigator or
the principal investigator.
Yeah. This grant involved researchers from other countries, from multiple disciplines, from economics, philosophy, psychology, and it insisted that people work together, kind of breaking those silos that people sometimes operate on in academia. It's my understanding.
Yeah, so that's really fundamentally the purpose of the grant was to promote a crosstalk between different academic disciplines on happiness, so that the philosophers aren't just reading and talking to other philosophers, the psychologists aren't just talking to other psychologists, and especially between the humanities and the sciences. So really for about half the grants we awarded, all the grants had some interdisciplinary component where you're reaching across between the humanities and sciences. But about half of them, the biggest grants, tended to go to teams where they were required to have, there were science projects, scientific research, but they had to include either a theologian or religious studies scholar on the team. And it was, I was wondering if anybody, but it turns out if you're offering money, people will find ways of talking to each other. So I think we made some headway. I mean, these are very large fields, so it's hard to know how much of an impact you have. But I think we made some headway getting people to understand how philosophical and religious traditions, for instance, have really thought about, well, what happiness is and what matters and whether you're measuring the right things.
And that was what I understood too, that some collaboration from this conference led to, let's develop a new measurement of happiness.
Oh, yeah. So one of I'd had in my mind, as some years, it was in 2012, I visited Bhutan to work with the government on their gross national happiness survey. And so I was looking at the psychological well-being questions, and I really wasn't that happy. It's amazing what they're accomplishing in that country, because it's a tiny country and they don't have a lot of money. But I wasn't that crazy about the psychological well-being questions, especially emotional well-being. They were, what would be better? I was kind of at a loss. Because finding something that actually looks like a happiness measure that actually works well, there wasn't that many things. So developed an interest in building a scale that would reflect, I think, be better grounded theoretically, and also kind of look more like a happiness measure that could be used for policy purposes, potentially. And through the grant, I met a young psychologist at UPenn, and we're working now. We've got a scale developed, and actually right now we're doing a study in a few countries to see how the scale performs. So
it's really exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting, and it's very different from what I was trained to do.
Has your definition of what happiness is changed through this experience?
Yeah, it has actually. So when I first started working on it in graduate school, I just took it to be obvious, like the psychologists did, that happiness was just life satisfaction. So life satisfaction is what most happiness research looks at. You can think of that as a judgment about your life as a whole. So you ask people questions like, think about your life as a whole. How would you say things are going for you these days? Just say, are you extremely satisfied or extremely dissatisfied or somewhere in between? I think over the years, I've come to see that kind of measure works better than I would have ever guessed, but it has limitations. And at first I thought it was just obvious that that's what happiness is. What else could happiness be? And I was originally going to run kind of the provocative line that, well, maybe there is no such thing as happiness or unhappiness, because I think most of the time it's not clear that people even have an opinion about their lives as a whole. Like when you ask people if they're satisfied, they make something up on the spot. That's the best evidence we have. Well, for one thing, I actually think you could quibble about what counts as actually being satisfied, having the attitude or not. And I didn't want to fight that battle. But also I realized that actually wasn't really what I thought was the most helpful way to think about happiness. And I came to see it as something closer to the opposite of anxiety and depression, more of an emotional matter. So the technical term that I and a lot of my colleagues like to use is emotional well-being.
So I'm trying to imagine, like you talked about this experience of being in the water, in the ocean, and you felt that surge of happiness that hadn't been there.
Yeah.
And you realized, wow, that's been missing. Is that more close? Is that similar to that emotional well-being?
Yeah, no, that was what I was, and that's really what, Yeah, and it was kind of thinking about experiences like that led
Yeah.
me to my view of happiness. So I think it's most helpful to think of happiness or emotional well-being as really having three basic aspects. One is the kind of feeling happy side of it that everybody thinks of. I actually think that's the least important part, but I do think it's certainly important. Joy is important. But a second part of it is what I call engagement, or just, you can think of it as a sense of energy or vitality, and this is kind of your emotional response to, if you're in a good situation, that there are lots of opportunities, so it makes sense to engage with life and really, you have a spring in your step, that sort of thing. And now it's part of what I experienced, in the surf there. And one way to think about it is the opposite. Depression, people think of depression as sadness. That's only one aspect of depression. The more characteristic thing is kind of this psychological withdrawal or lethargy. Where it's just, and it may be that's adaptive in some cases, where it's a way of getting you to disengage from a way of life that doesn't work. You're in a bad relationship or something. So in depression, as awful as it is, it's like you're kind of disengaging from your life. Well, being happy, the engagement side of it, is sort of the opposite of that, vitality. And then I would say the most important part of it is roughly tranquility. I call it attunement because I think it's more complicated. It involves a sense of confidence, not just peace of mind, but a sense of confidence. What you might call uncompression or expansiveness, where you feel kind of, think of the opposite, feeling compressed, where you're caught up in a rat race, you're like on a treadmill, you feel small, like you're pressed in upon. Compression would be like the response you have to if you're just in a really threatening situation and you just sort of hunker down. It's hard to put words to it. Occasionally writers will talk about it, but it's not really well understood, but I think it's an important aspect of it. When I'm on the ocean, this kind of, it's like, I feel bigger. And the people who live in that environment seem to me like bigger people. It's hard to explain. But.
So if you're living in the world where you feel best, there's this, like, it's hard to explain what it is, but it is this, there's this expansive quality to it that they're really living their lives, is that what you?
Yeah, and it connects with tranquility, and I think the opposite is sort of anxiety and stress and compression. But it's really, you're kind of at home. You're psychically at home in your life. That's a very metaphorical way of putting it, but you're in your element, and it's sort of, one way of thinking about it is, maybe if you have kind of a stressful job and then at the holidays you go home and you're hanging out with your old buddies from when you were a kid, and then you just relax and you're just yourself. That's you're not, so you don't feel so compressed. You kind of let your hair down, so to speak, and relax.
I'm trying to imagine what did I miss? You told us about your writing a little bit, that these books didn't hurt anyone. But I'm sure they did
I don't think so.
I'm sure they did more than that.
Sometimes people say they make decitions,
Okay.
on what they've read, and then so far I'm not aware of any
Bad
damage resulting. But the responsibility can be a little scary.
That's great. In this one, Happiness, a very short introduction. Was there any takeaway themes or takeaway messages that throughout this book, or?
Well, it's meant to sort of summarize kind of where we are and what we know about happiness. An important thing I want to emphasize was that happiness, at least, and some of your viewers might be thinking of happiness as something more like what Aristotle talked about, or as a good life. And I think most Americans, the way we use the word generally is for something there, or just a state of mind, and that's the way I use it. But I think happiness is one part of it. And I don't think it's the only part. I think acting well, virtue, or just living well is an important part of it. And so how you conduct your life is actually, I think, more important than how happy you are for a good life. And part of life is finding the right balance between your own personal happiness and well-being, other values like excellence, and being morally a good person.
You've brought up beauty and excellence and a good life. And somewhere else I was reading about you talking about opportunity, security, And there was one other.
Oh, success.
And success.
So that's, I think of the three facets of happiness as sort of, in biological terms, as responses to, because there's really, I think, three types of conditions that human beings face that are relevant to our well-being. One is, are we secure? Are we safe? If so, then we get this attunement or tranquility. Then, even if you're secure, do you have opportunities? Is it really worth engaging with your environment? So then that brings the engagement side of it. And then finally, then there's actually good things happening, so you actually succeed in pursuing the opportunity. And then you feel cheerful, you feel happy. So that's where that comes from.
Well, then we were talking about beauty and success, or
excellence. Yeah. In my view, I think human well-being is one of the fundamental values, things that really matters in the world. But I also think excellence has its own independent value. And I think beauty does too. And teaching environmental ethics has especially got me thinking about beauty, because I don't really know how else to explain why destroying environmental destruction is so bad. Aside from, obviously humans have a pretty strong self-interest. We're not going to be very happy if we destroy our ecosystem or even alive. But I think also to just when they built Glen Canyon Dam, creating Lake Powell, where people had a lot of fun there, but it was sort of like filling in the Grand Canyon. It was apparently one of the most beautiful natural formations in the world. Well, to me, that's like an act of vandalism. It's like spray painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, or the fire of Notre Dame. I don't think when we saw Notre Dame burning, I don't think very many of us reacted like, oh, this is bad because consumer preferences are being frustrated. Right? It's this work of great majesty and also of human excellence. I think we admire great skill, why we like the arts and watching athletic events. Is there's beauty, but there's also excellence, and we admire that. And you might reasonably trade. And I think this is one of the things that our culture does not really support, is this idea that you might reasonably trade some of your own happiness to be an artist and create beauty, or to just be the best craftsman, best at your trade you can be, or to do worthwhile things. Our culture doesn't really give us a lot of space to think that way, but I think what we ultimately value.
Growing up, I was fortunate enough to be told you can be anything you want to be when you grow up. I think a lot of children are told that by their parents, and I'm so lucky that I was told that as well. But then I also feel like we have to temper that with, you can be whatever you want to be, but you can't be everything. Like there's no room for people to be craftsmen and really be appreciated. If you wanted to spend your life crafting things like tables or whatnot, like you can do it, but unless you become almost the best in the world, you can't do it. And so we live in a very interesting time where that isn't really appreciated.
No, and that is, I think it was a mistake telling my students, you can't be the president of the United States. It's just not going to happen, realistically. Given all the abilities you have to have and all the things have to come together.
Sure.
Anyway, they didn't like hearing that. But I do think we can, if we set I think people often underestimate themselves. And so there's that grain of truth in that. So you don't want people to have their expectations too low, but also sometimes you can do anything you want. So, but sometimes there are costs to following your bliss,
sure.
And the result may not be blissful. And I think it's just a tough choice that a lot of people face, where I think if one does it with eyes wide open, then choosing to be a jazz musician or a painter for a living, keep in mind that retirement will come someday. You want to be able to, pay the bills. But on the other hand, often you can find ways of doing it. My mother was an artist, and she was lucky that we weren't rich. Well, by global standards, all of us are rich, but we weren't rich by American standards. But she at least didn't have to didn't have to support a family with painting, even though she was quite good at it. And that kind of freed her to do that. It's a tough one. One of the hardest questions I ever got was from a young man who was trying to decide whether to, basically pursue music and filmmaking, or to do something to be easier to make more of a living. Like, well, you know, I'm not trained to give advice, and I don't know you well enough, so I can't really advise. But at least, one thing that a lot of philosophers would say is it can make sense to choose things other than just what will make you happiest, and maybe the creation of beauty or doing something really well, being really good at something. That can be a reasonable trade-off, and sometimes, even if that's the harder path, sometimes that can be a smart thing to do. And I'm so happy for the people who make that choice.
Yeah.
They make my life better for sure.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. And I know you're quite a busy schedule. You'll be traveling again soon. And I think you said you're meeting with the Cardinal at the Vatican here in a week or so.
Yeah.
That's on demand. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And all of your time.
It was a pleasure.
And if you're just checking us out, I'm sure you can find these books, like you said, on Amazon.
I'm sure, yeah.
Or local
yes.
stores, I don't know.
Yes.
So, The Pursuit of Unhappiness and Happiness, A Very Short Introduction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.